Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode actually that we've done on the Epic Fitness Summit YouTube channel. Unfortunately, Lawrence away this week and possibly next week as well, as he's just, his wife has just had a baby. So to not let everyone down, we're going to continue this week, and we are interviewing Greg Nuckols from across the pond. So say hello, Greg.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing well.
I'm doing well. So, firstly, let's just tell people a bit about yourself, for people to understand who you are, what you do. Of course, because some people might not know who you are and might find out after this and then come and see you at the summit. That's what we hope.
All right. Well, I'm Greg Nuckols. I'm a powerlifter and strength coach. Have my bachelor's in exercise science, starting a master's program soon. Compete in powerlifting. I've held 3 world records. I think 2 of them have been broken, but I still have 1, so that's okay. I can live with it. And I keep a blog, stringtheory.com, spelled S-T-R-E-N-G theory.com. And I'm the content manager for Juggernaut Fitness Systems.
World records? I didn't know about that one.
Seriously?
No, I didn't know.
Richard, we've known each other for like a year.
Well, this is true, but you've never mentioned it. You're too humble.
It's just not what I lead with.
Well,
I don't know.
To be fair, I think you should lead with that one. If I were you, I would. It should be on your business card.
I actually think it is. My wife made my business cards, and I think she put something about that on them.
Nice. Awesome. So, firstly, I think the first question to ask is, how did you even get into this industry? Because I think, well, from what I've seen, you've been quite new up and coming, and you've grown really, really quick in terms of popularity lately. Anyway.
Like how did I get into like the online side of things, or just how did I
okay
get into
well we'll start how did you get into fitness industry first?
It's just what I've always wanted to do. I always played a lot of sports growing up, and it's just what I loved, and I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, like if I wanted to be like a trainer or like a like a strength coach at the collegiate level or something like that. But I knew I always wanted to do something in the fitness realm, and more like the performance realm. From the time I was like 14 or 15, I almost didn't. My parents weren't super thrilled about that. Just the negative stereotypes a lot of people have about trainers and fitnessy people. So I actually went to college as a history major, and I'm like 2 classes away from finishing that degree.
Oh, really?
But end of my sophomore year, I was like, screw it. I'm looking at job opportunities, and I don't want to be a high school teacher because I hate children, and I don't want to be a museum curator because I like people who aren't children. So I just went with my heart and switched to exercise science then, and haven't looked back.
Well, for now, it seems to have paid off for making that decision. I'm not saying you're a finished article, but you've done well for now.
Thanks, man.
So I suppose let's go into the online thing. How did you get into the online coaching from that point?
It was actually just kind of accidental. The main reason I started writing was just for myself, really, because, it's easy to think you understand something when it's just like ideas floating around in your head, or, when you're just like BSing to like your friends or people who don't know any better. Yeah. But when you think you know something and you try to write about it, and, you're trying to make things like, one thing flow from the next, things support each other, blah, blah, blah. Like, do I have enough evidence or resources, or at least like, a compelling theory to like explain what's going on here? Then you realize just how because usually you'll find out that when you're trying to put stuff on paper, you don't know nearly as much as you thought you did when it was just in your head.
Yeah.
So the main reason I started writing was just kind of to expose myself to my own stupidity. And so then I would see like where I needed to fill in the gaps going from there. And for whatever reason, people started reading it. And I never really did any promotional stuff. People just started reading it and sharing it. And towards probably like April or May of this year, it just really took off. In terms of the online coaching, I got into that mainly through Photocracy. They asked me if I'd like to be a coach for one of their online group coaching spots. That started beginning of this year, like early January. Last year. And so that went really well, and it just snowballed from there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like one of the key, or one of the main pathways for people to get into the online coaching is actually through not directly trying to be an online coach, but just writing and putting content out there. And then, if you get people reading and inspired by what you are writing, and usually get clients out of it. I've found that myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose when you just said you started getting big in April, May, that's when I think I met you through our client Dan, who will be listening at some point.
Yeah. It may have been slightly earlier than that, but yeah, sometime around this early spring.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's all the theory that coaches, you can read and you read into all the research yourself, and what in whichever ways you can. But what do you think's the biggest thing you've learned from purely online coaching, and actually practicing what you're reading and writing about?
I'd say really the biggest thing is just keeping channels of communication open. Because prior to doing online stuff, I had experience like training people one-on-one, training athletes in a group setting, but doing everything in person. And when you're used to that, there's a lot of things you just take for granted. Like when it comes to changing someone's program, like day to day and week to week, if you're seeing them 3 or 4 days a week, you see how they're handling the workload. You see how the reps are looking. You can see what their body language is. Like, are they excited to train? And if they're not excited to train with them, as a coach, one of the main things you try to do is like motivate people, get them invested in the process. And so you have so much both objective and subjective feedback that you're getting all the time when you're working with someone in person. And you really just don't get that online, at least not in real time. I mean, the closest thing is like having people send you videos, which is good, but I mean, anyone who's worked with people in person and online can tell you, you just can't see as much in a video as you can like when you're there in the flesh. So yeah, the biggest thing that I realized early on is just like how important feedback is, and really encouraging people to give you feedback. Just because like if all you're seeing is how many sets and reps they're doing and what the weights are, I mean that's obviously very valuable information. You nearly enough.
Yeah, so I mean the hard data is something that a lot of coaches will get from their clients, just the sets and reps they've done and the total volume and everything. But what you're saying is the subjective feedback from clients is the hardest bit, or one of the most important bits to get right when you're an online coach.
Yeah, it is. And I found that there are ways to get around that somewhat. I think the most important thing you get from subjective data is like recovery status.
Yeah.
When you work with people in person, you'll definitely see this. Typically, like a day or two before they start like overreaching. I don't want to necessarily use the word overtraining to describe it, but before their performance starts to dip, be, just generally in a worse mood. Like their body language will be more negative. They'll just seem a little bit off. And if you push them, they can still perform like at peak level. But if you keep pushing them when they're feeling like that, then within a couple days to a couple weeks, their performance is about to nosedive. And when you're just sending someone, hey, here's the sets and reps you're supposed to do this week, and then they send it back, if they're a self-motivated person, you're not going to get any indication that something is wrong, because all of the numbers will still look normal. So if you have someone who's willing to spend some money and get HRV system, heart rate variability, you can get those two tend to correlate fairly strongly when people's like mood starts dipping and when their HRV scores start becoming more negative, and when their HRV scores get lower. So for people who don't know what HRV is, that stands for heart rate variability. Oh man, I wasn't planning to go this deep. Okay, it's fine. So HRV stands for heart rate variability. So when you think about how your heart beats, you tend to think of it as kind of like a metronome with beats that are evenly spaced out. So if your heart rate is 60 beats per minute, there's 60 seconds in a minute. So if your heart's beating 60 times, it's beating once per second, just like a metronome. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfectly evenly spaced. But that's not how it works at all. There's variability. So, if it's 60 beats per minute, there's an average of 1 second between beats, obviously, because that's math. But, it might be 1 second between these two beats, 0.8, 1.2, 0.9, 1.1, 1. And so it averages out to 1, but there's variability between those beats. And that's what HRV measures. And so you may be thinking, well, that's cool. My heart is beating at irregular times, but why does that matter to me? It matters because that's a way to kind of get a snapshot at what your autonomic nervous system is doing. So that's your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, or your fight and flight and rest and digest systems. And so basically a high HRV number means that you're in your rest and digest system, and a low one means you're in your fight or flight system. Yeah. And most people's HRV will tend to be within 5, 10, 15 of baseline that they establish. And when it gets way above that, that's an indication that you've pushed them really hard and their body's really strong in that rest and digest system to try to recover from what you're doing to them, what they're doing in the gym. And the really good thing about HRV is it doesn't just take into account training stress, like if someone's not sleeping well, or if their diet sucks, or if they have a lot of stress at home or at work. All of that will be reflected in their HRV number as well. Yeah. So that helps with planning training as well. Because it.
Do you employ this with most clients or all clients?
I ask most clients if they would like to, and I suggest that they do. But the two best systems out there are BioForce and iThlete. And iThlete is like $60, and you have to get your own heart rate monitor. You have to get a chest strap. So it ends up being, after the chest strap, over $100. And BioForce is, I think, when I got it, it was $240. I seem to remember it being like $280 now, but it's somewhere in the mid to high 200s. So a lot of people who are already paying for coaching don't then want to go out and make another major purchase. So I don't require it from people I work with, but I recommend it to them.
Okay. Well, I suppose if people are pretty committed to their training and to their coaching, it's something they would consider. I know a couple of my clients would like to do that.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that's great because when you're writing workouts for people, HRV. And again, this is tends to be an advantage of working with someone in person versus online, because online usually you're giving people like at least a week of training at a time, and so let's say they work out Monday, Wednesday they really should be taking it easier, but you're not going to hear from them until like Friday or Saturday. So they end up pushing hard on Wednesday, so then they're even tireder on Friday. Maybe their performance was fine on Wednesday, but they really should have been taking it a little bit easier. And then on Friday, they're just crashing. And then the next week, like the snapshot you're getting is, oh, I feel so worn down right now. So then when you have them pull back a little bit, you tend to be a little bit conservative because you're not getting that feedback from them all the time. And so, they may only need to take like one day off and one day, because you're not getting that feedback all the time and you really want to make sure you don't push them way too hard and injure them, you might have them take 2 days off and 1 day easy. So they effectively end up missing a training day. Anyway, so with HRV, what you can do to kind of circumvent that is when you write your workouts, you can say, okay, here's your base workout. Here's what I would like you to do. But if your HRV number is like significantly above baseline or if it's significantly above baseline and you're kind of into that like hyper parasympathetic overreaching state, here's what I want you to do. Like it'll typically be a little bit lighter, quite a bit lower volume, to let them still get some reps in, still get some practice.
So when do they, I'll just put in there, when do they take that reading, Greg? Is that before the session?
Every morning before they get out of bed.
Right, okay.
And with some really well trained, people with like heart rates in like the low 50s or something.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't get a good HRV reading first thing in the morning. Well, when they're still in bed. So for them, you need to get them to like sit up or stand up first. But for most people, most of the time, it's just first thing in the morning before they get out of bed.
Okay.
But yeah, so you can write your base workout, but then you can make notes, like so they know how to tailor it if their HRV number is super high, or then like if it's crashing, like if they're super strong and sympathetic, which shouldn't be first thing in the morning. So if you are, like that's a sign that something's going on. Then you can say like, if you're getting these super low numbers, you're just not training today, or like don't go above 50% and cut your volume by 2/3.
Yeah.
So, and that's also good because it helps them kind of get more confident with the training process and take ownership of it. Because even though you're making most of the executive decisions like week to week, that it still gives them some control about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I think people listening will definitely take away something there, especially if they are dedicated coaches or have coaching takes up a lot of their time. So we have a few questions here, Greg, from members of Lift the Bar, who are our media partners. And one question from Emma Story Gordon. She asks, in relation to the notion that volume is key to hypertrophy improvements, would we always have to push beyond our previous weekly volume to gain muscle mass?
Okay. Not necessarily week to week. I mean, you can't throw the concept of periodization out the window. Like basically, you're not doing the same. Like you're not having the same type of stimulus every day or every week for months and months on end. So no, I mean like there will be periods of higher volume and periods of lower volume. So it's not necessarily that you need more volume every day or every week indefinitely, but absolutely, like if you look at year-to-year averages, or if you're comparing like one macro cycle to the previous macro cycle, there should be like a positive trend in volume over time.
Yeah.
But a problem that people do tend to run into from time to time when they're like when they do understand that volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy, they kind of do get into that mindset that I have to be like continually increasing my volume if I want to keep improving.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously the end point of that is like if you take that to its logical extreme, then eventually you're going to get to a point where you're working out like 8 hours a day every day, which most people with jobs can't do. So that's where either like deloads, especially like longer deloads, or planned periods of lower volume for a month or two, that's where that really comes in handy, because you know you can't just look at the magnitude of stimulus to your body. You also have to look at how robustly your body is responding to that stimulus. So as you're constantly increasing volume, the magnitude of stimulus is constantly increasing.
Yeah.
But when you get to the point that you're doing twice as much volume, but the magnitude of response your body has is the same or less as it used to be to half the volume, then you know, pulling back, taking a month or two, you know, cutting volume pretty significantly, and just trying to maintain muscle and strength, not necessarily get any stronger, but just do enough to maintain. What that's doing is, yeah, that's a month or two that you're not getting bigger or stronger, which is no fun, but it's resensitizing your body to a given level of stimulus.
Yeah.
So then when you start ramping up volume again, you can start back with, you know, maybe what your initial volume was, or just ever so slightly higher, and, you know, you can start making progress again on a more moderate level of volume, instead of like the doubled level of volume that you had eventually gotten to. And, you know, and then you build back up to that over time. And so, you know, you're still going to have that positive trend in volume, because you're not going to be able to get away with doing the exact same thing every time. But, you know, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 months of increasing volume, and then either like a 2-week deload or a month or two of lower volume to resensitize your body to that volume stimulus. And then a period of building back up again. So that second block of building volume will need to be a little bit higher volume than the first block. But, you know, you're looking at a 10-month span there. And if you would have not taken that period of lower volume or not taken those deloads, then you're looking at, you know, 10 months of just linearly increasing your volume.
Yeah.
One, you're going to get to just stupid levels of training volume that, you know, may be a good idea, like if you don't have a job and don't like having a roof over your head, but probably not feasible for most of us. And two, it's really not going to be that much better for you, if at all, because as you're doing more and more and more, yes, the magnitude of the stressor is increasing, but your responsiveness to it is decreasing because of the repeated bouts effect. The more subsequent, or the more consecutive times you're exposed to something that's similar, the less robustly you respond to it.
Wow, that was a good answer, Greg. So that, I suppose that quite leads into another question from Chris, who asks, do you think people are waving daily undulated periodization around as the answer to everything these days?
Yeah, I mean,
people are screaming from the rooftops about it, about DUP at the moment.
Well, how that's worded is as a yes or no question, and yes, I think people are doing that.
It's a bit of a joke question as well.
Yeah, I think, and it's one of those things. I've written an article about this before. People hear about like something periodization, like some word or phrase with periodization after it,
yeah.
And they think like, oh, this is some discrete system, and it's the best thing ever. Like it's the bee's knees, it's the cat's pajamas. But like that's not how periodization works. So like DUP, okay, so periodization is basically, broad definition, that's how you organize training over time. And training is organized on different time scales. So it's organized at the level of the workout itself, like exercise order. It's organized at the level of the training week or microcycle. At the training month, doesn't necessarily have to be a calendar month, but 2 to 6 weeks. That's your mesocycle. And then even longer term than that, a string of mesocycles, that's your macrocycle. And so, when you're taking a bird's eye view of periodization, it's not just like these discrete factors. It's a lot of different factors that go into organizing training on those different timescales. So DUP in particular is talking about organizing training on a weekly timescale. If you're doing 3 or 4 workouts in a week, all it's basically saying is each one should be in different volume and intensity ranges than the other one. Like, especially if you're training one particular lift, say 3 or 4 times a week, if you're doing sets of 5 on Monday, then you shouldn't do those same sets of 5 with the same weight on Wednesday and Friday. And so, yeah, when you're looking at DUP, it's talking about organizing training intensity and volume, like, between days in a single week or microcycle. So it's not a form of periodization in and of itself. I mean, DUP is not exclusive from linear periodization. So you could take like a DUP setup within a week and just progress all of those workouts linearly. Yeah. So that's, DUP like on a weekly scale, but then on the mesocycle scale, it might be organized linearly. But that doesn't preclude it from having, the next macrocycle or the next mesocycle focusing on different characteristics. So it's DUP and it's linear periodization and it's block periodization. All of those things are interwoven and they work together. So the research tends to indicate that on a weekly scale, DUP tends to work better than, exact same volume and intensity for a lift multiple times per week. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better than all other forms of periodization, because it's not a form of periodization in and of itself.
Cool.
Like it's not a complete system.
Yeah.
It has to be put together with other stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that answers that one for Chris. We have another question here that's just a pretty general question, but I suppose it can cover a lot of things. What do you think are the most common programming mistakes made generally by, coaches and personal trainers?
The biggest one I see, honestly, is just, like, people have their own philosophy and people have their own, I guess, like, thing they're particularly interested in. Like, it may be bodybuilding, it may be powerlifting and strength, it may be Olympic lifting, it may be corrective exercise, whatever. And regardless of the goals the client comes to you with, you try to shove them into the little box of, your own specialty and like the particular things you're passionate about. And like, they're the client, they're the boss. Like, you should be helping them reach the goals that they have for themselves, not that you have for them. And, if someone comes to you and their goals are so far outside of your realm of expertise, or, just so far away from what you're interested in. So, like, deep down, like, I am not passionate about these goals. Like if someone came to me and they said, I want to run a marathon, like, I could go through PubMed and look at all of the research on aerobic training, but like, I'm not passionate about marathon running. Like, I know that even if I tried to be super passionate about that client and super invested in their goals, I would have a hard time doing it, just because marathon running isn't really something I care about. Yeah. So yeah, if someone comes to you with, and like, either that's not something you're knowledgeable about or passionate about, like, don't be afraid to refer them to someone else. Like, there's no rule saying you have to take on every client that comes to you. So yeah, I think the biggest mistake I see is just, like, you have what you're knowledgeable about and passionate about, and you try to cram everyone into that box. And I mean, either if you're competent enough to help them reach their goals for themselves, then you should do that. And if you're not, refer out. But don't try to train everyone the same way.
Yeah. I think one really common mistake that I personally see a lot is coaches offering part of their package that they say, you know, I sell this for 12 weeks, and every 4 weeks you get a completely new workout plan. You know, and then a good example of someone not doing it is with you and our client Scott. Now, I think it's correct to say that the kind of program he's following, it hasn't really changed throughout however many months and months and months that we've been working together.
It has recently.
Just recently.
Yeah, this past month there was a pretty big shift when he decided he wanted to train for a powerlifting meet.
Yeah.
But
prior to that, there was, I mean, you know, just in comparison to most trainers, they may have changed everything, you know, maybe after 4 weeks, maybe after 8 weeks. And Scott simply had a program, and we were just following that same thing and just improving week in, week out. And the fact that, you know, we were following something so consistently proved to be one of the biggest providers of him improving, you know?
Yeah. Well, and Scott, like, honestly, Scott is just a dream to work with because, like, I would never take myself on as a client because I know that I would be a complete shit to work with. And I hope I'm allowed to say that. But I'm just someone, I'm all over the place. I don't like doing the same thing for a long period of time. And so, like, even if something was working, like, I just get bored. Like, you can ask my wife, she's my training partner. Like, I'll write a program for us, and like 2 weeks later, I'm like, like, she's the one who has to be like, no, we're following your stupid workout. Like, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, Scott is a fantastic person to work with because, I mean, the main thing he's after is, like, he wants to get bigger and stronger. And I give him a training plan, and if he's stronger at the end of the month than he was at the start of it, then it's awesome. And he loves to do it. And he's like, okay, this made me stronger this month. Let's do something very, very similar next month because I know it makes me stronger. So that makes him incredibly easy to work with.
Yeah. Well, that's what you get when you work with someone who's in the military, of course.
Yes.
Which is a rarity. But I think, you know, a problem with coaches is that they offer their clients, look, if you pay this amount, I'm going to give you a brand new workout every 4 weeks. And that just does not make you a better coach because you can give someone a new program.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that has to do with like what people are working out for, because okay, so I won't use names here, but someone who one of the people who I'm training right now, he doesn't really like have any goals. Like, he doesn't want to compete in like physique or bodybuilding or anything. He doesn't want to compete in powerlifting. He just likes working out, and he like the only reason he goes to the gym is for fun, and so he wants the gym to be fun. And if he does the same thing, you know, too many times in a row, it just starts getting boring. So, like, I do give him drastically different workouts every week, like, because what he's trying to get out of training is he just wants to go to the gym and have fun, and, like, yeah, he wants to get a little bigger and a little stronger, but, you know, as we both know, the main ingredient there is just consistency, and the thing that keeps him consistent is doing different stuff all the time. But comparing him to someone like Scott, who, you know, he wants to compete in different things. He wants to look good for photo shoots all the time. Like, you have to use, you know, much more like ordered and logical means to progress someone towards some sort of objective goal when you're training someone like Scott versus my other client who, like, he just wants me to give him completely different things just because he wants to go to the gym and be like, hey, this looks like a brutal workout. I'm excited to work out today.
I suppose that's just two complete opposite sides of the spectrum On one side, you've got Scott, who's regiment, who's going to follow something to a T, provided it's working, and someone who's just a bit blasé about it and just wants fun in the gym. But in the background, you're still, looking at the basics and still getting him a bit stronger and big and whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, there's a question about what is the best form. I suppose I know the answer, but what is the best form of periodization to get a huge squat? No.
I really don't even know where to start for that.
I remember there was one client you were working on with me, and we wanted to get her squat up, and you had her squatting pretty much every single day. I suppose that's a good way.
Was that Rochelle?
No.
Who was that again?
Vanessa, was it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. I did something very similar for Rochelle as well.
Okay.
But yeah, Vanessa.
Do you want to explain what you did there?
Well, the thing for Vanessa, she had a meet coming up in, I want to say it was like 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah. And so the main reason I had her doing what I had her doing is so there's three main things that go into being able to lift a lot of weight. One is just how big your muscles are, because obviously that's a limit. If you have small muscles, they're hyper efficient. They're not going to be able to produce much force. 2 is neurological efficiency, like how quickly and how strongly can your nervous system get those muscles to fire. And 3, closely related to 2, is how technically proficient you are. Like, it doesn't matter if your muscles fire very strongly if they fire in a stupid pattern and put you in bad positions. So yeah, when you look at those constraints and you have 5 weeks to get someone stronger, or it may have been even like 4 or 3 for her. It wasn't much time at all. And she had already put in her entry fee for that meet. So, that's not enough time to get someone bigger. So that constraint is out the window immediately, because, if you're looking at like a 1 or 2 week taper, you might have like 2 weeks to train. So you're not going to get significantly bigger in 2 weeks. So the two things we were working with were technique and neurological efficiency. And so that's the main reason I had her squatting just about every day, because with the first factor, hypertrophy, out the window, the higher frequency approach was best for optimizing those other 2 factors. Whereas if I'm training someone longer term, like Dan or like Scott, and all 3 of those factors are still in play, then having that super high frequency approach, and when I say super high frequency, I mean every day. So you can still train a lift like 3 times a week, and that's probably better for hypertrophy than just training it once a week. But people I'm training longer term, they might do a lift 2 or 3 times a week, but there's going to be enough volume per session to have like a robust hypertrophy response. Yeah. But that means that they're not going to be able to come in and do quality work the next day. Whereas with Rochelle, since it was a shorter period of time, each session was really probably too low a volume to, I mean, not that there was zero hypertrophy response, but like a very, very small one, because that's not what we were interested in. We were interested in taking the muscle she currently had and getting as much as we possibly could out of it in 4 weeks. And I seem to remember she had like a 15 kilo squat PR, so yeah, it paid off.
I remember, yeah, she did actually. And she made it into the Worlds, if I'm in Australia. Cool. So, and next we actually have a question from Scott himself. He asks, when should your last session be before a powerlifting meet, before the comp?
Okay, so last heavy session and last session period, different answers, and also it depends who you are. Like basically, if you're a larger person and a stronger person, and when you lift heavy, you can really beat the crap out of yourself, then your last heavy session should be farther out from the meet than if you're smaller. So like if I'm training someone who, like, let's say they're a 148 or a 16, like let's say they're 75 kilos, you know, they're squatting 400 pounds, 140, 180 kilos, thereabouts. Their last heavy squat session may be 7, 8, 9 days out from the meet. Still pretty close to the meet. And then, but that's not going to be the last time they squat, because I want that pattern to stay fresh. So they'll still be working like 50, 60% all the way up until like a day or two out from the meet, because that's not going to be enough to cause a lot of fatigue, but it's going to keep that pattern fresh for them. Whereas like someone like myself, my last heavy squat is 14, 15 days out from a meet. And I might have like one more like 75, 80%, like slightly heavier day, a little bit closer. But the last time I'm going over 90% is at least 2 weeks out from a meet. My last heavy deadlift will be further out than my squat would be. And I'll still press heavy until 6, 7 days out, just because that doesn't take nearly as long to recover. Whereas like if someone is benching like 100 kilos, and they have their last heavy bench like 4 days out from a meet, that's probably not really going to affect them adversely. So just in general, just painting in very broad strokes, for most people most of the time, last heavy squat should be somewhere between 7 and 10 days out. Last heavy deadlift should be somewhere between 10 and 14 days out, and last heavy bench should be somewhere between like 5 and 7 days out. But that's not the last time you do the movement before the meet. All the way up to the day or two before the meet, that's totally fine for light, incredibly non-fatiguing work, just to stay in your groove.
Okay, cool, great. Finally, Greg, I know this is something you've implemented with Scott as well, but have you personally tried BFR, blood flow restriction training, and what do you think about that?
It's fantastic. I love it for several different reasons. If they're like, I'm one who very much believes that 9 out of 100, if it sounds too good to believe, it probably is, or if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But blood flow restriction training is really like the one thing that sounds too good to be true, but the research very strongly indicates that it's not. And the reason I love it is threefold. One, it causes pretty robust hypertrophy, comparable to lifting heavy, which is kind of crazy. Like, you're working with 20, 30, 40% of your max for sets of like 20 or 30, 40 reps, and like it causes pretty similar levels of hypertrophy to like heavy sets of 5 to 10. Like that doesn't seem like it would work, but unless the research is lying, and unless what I've personally seen is lying, it does. So that's super cool in and of itself. And second, why that's so cool is there's research showing that it does not cause any muscle damage, or at least not a significant enough to raise markers of muscle damage like creatine kinase and stuff like that. So basically what you're looking at is, and there's also research showing that when used in conjunction with heavier training, it also like amplifies the strength response. So there's one with football players, and they were doing their regular strength work, and then one group, I think they took like 30% of their max and did like 2 or 3 sets to failure at the end of their session with squats and bench press. And one group did it without blood flow restriction, and one group did it with blood flow restriction.
So how did they do blood flow restriction for bench press?
They just wrapped it around their upper arm.
Okay.
And so, like, the blood flow restriction group, not only did they gain, like, not only can it be used for hypertrophy, but in that study, the blood flow restriction group actually gained more strength than the other group did as well, which is super cool. So yeah, and again, that's not a replacement for heavy training. That's used in conjunction with it. So, but yeah, the cool thing is, as a standalone modality, it doesn't increase markers of muscle damage. So it can really be used pretty frequently, and it's not going to interfere with other training very much at all. So if you have someone like on a very, very strength-focused program, and they're doing a high volume of heavy stuff, and that's, you know, kind of beating their joints up, to use a very scientific term, then, you know, if you want to help them add some size as well, you can add some blood flow restriction work in there, and that will give them like another hypertrophy stimulus without you know, putting that extra stress on the muscle and extra stress on the joint. And the third reason I like it, and the one that's less commonly talked about, is how you can use it outside of the gym. So in a few studies with people who had injuries that required immobilization, doing blood flow restriction work, like not even working out, like if someone's arm was immobilized, you can just put that band around the top of their arm for, and I'd have to go back and look at the specifics, but I seem to remember it being like 3 or 4 sets of like a minute or two. That caused, I want to say that it almost entirely eliminated the atrophy that tends to occur with immobilization, which is crazy, because, you know, if someone has been casted, like, they almost always lose a ton of muscle in that limb. And so doing blood flow restriction, like I said, without even working out, almost completely mitigates that atrophy that you tend to see. And also, I've come across at least one study. I seem to remember there being a couple more, but there's at least one study showing that it improves recovery between sessions as well. There was one where they did lower body training, and then on the day between the training session and the testing session, they did blood flow restriction with the lower limbs. Again, not even exercising, just wrapping the band around it, including blood flow for a couple sets of a couple minutes. And that improved markers of performance between the training and the testing to a greater degree than just rest did. So it can almost be used as an active recovery protocol as well. So yeah, it's super cool. I'm looking forward to more research coming out about it in the coming years.
I think Jeremy Lowenecki, is it, the leading researcher with that stuff? Awesome, Greg. I think yeah, that's 50 minutes now. Okay, we'll leave it there. And I think there's quite a few gems in there for people to take away. Hopefully we're going to get you on the We Do Science podcast with Laurent Bannock. We'll sort it out in the next few weeks when he's back. But
sounds great.
Thank you for joining us, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.